Chapter 3. The Phantom is Seen. Jupiter, Bob and Pete crouched beneath an overhanging rock. It wasn't completely dry, but it provided some shelter from the wind and rain. During the last few minutes, they'd scrambled over enough of the little island to convince them it had to be the Hand, and that there was no one else on it, and no boat. They had taken a close look at the curious spout, which shot up from the middle of a flat place on the rocky hump. Jupiter, whose scientific curiosity never flagged under any circumstances, explained that there must be a crack in the rock that went deep under the island. The waves of the storm forced water into it, to be expelled up the blowhole. However, they hadn't lingered to study the spout. They had to find shelter. After more stumbling around, they had found the rocky crevice that protected them now. "Sam's marooned us," Pete said indignantly, wiping rain from his face. "Why did he do it? That's what I want to know." "Maybe he made a mistake and thought this really was Skeleton Island," Bob suggested. "No," Jupiter shook his head. "He brought us here on purpose. I confess I'm baffled as to his reason. I'm also baffled by the fact that he knew we were investigators. There's something queer going on." "I'll buy a double helping of that," Pete grumbled. "I only hope we don't starve to death on this island before someone finds us." "We'll be found in the morning," Jupiter said. "Some fishing boat will spot us. We'll just have to stick it out tonight." "But there aren't any fishing boats up at this end of Atlantic Bay," Bob put in anxiously. "Don't you remember those articles we read? Some tiny red parasite has got into the oysters in this part of the bay. All the fishing boats have moved down to Melville at the south end, where the shellfish are still safe to eat. Fishingport is almost a ghost town because of the sickness of the oysters." "Someone will spot us," Jupiter said. "There will be a search on for us when it is learned we have disappeared, and at least we have seen the spout actually working." There didn't seem much more to be said. Fortunately, it was not too cold on the island, and the storm seemed to be letting up. The only thing they could do was wait for morning. When they had decided that, they relaxed. Soon they found themselves dozing off. Suddenly Pete woke. It took him a few seconds to remember where he was and what had happened. Then he saw that the storm had passed. The stars were out, and out on the water 100 yards away a light was flashing. Pete leaped up and started to yell. In a moment, Bob and Jupiter were awake and struggling sleepily to their feet. The light turned in their direction, like a probing finger trying to find them. Pete ripped off his yellow raincoat and waved it madly. "Here! Here!" he shouted. The light caught the billowing raincoat and held. Whoever was out there had seen them. The powerful beam of light pointed upwards, illuminating the sail of a small boat. Then it flickered along the shore and picked out a little beach. It held on that spot, bobbing as the boat moved. "He'll land there," Pete said. "He wants us to meet him there." "Luckily there is some starlight now," Jupiter observed. "Even so, we'll practically have to feel our way." "Look!" Bob exclaimed. "He's trying to help us." The flashlight was now flicking over the ground between the boys and the shoreline, showing them the way in brief glimpses. They made the best time they could. Even so, they each fell down and Pete skinned his knee. By the time they reached the beach, a small sailing boat was drawn up in the sand, the sail down. A boy in a windbreaker jacket and trousers rolled up to the knees stood on the sandy shore. He flashed his light briefly over their faces, then reversed it to shine it on himself. They saw a tanned, smiling face, topped by dark curly hair. Merry black eyes glinted at them. "Ahoy!" he said, in a voice with a foreign accent. "You are the 3 detectives, yes?" It seemed that everyone knew who they were. "We're the 3 investigators," Jupiter said. "We're certainly glad you found us." "I think I know where to look for you," the boy said. He was almost as tall as Pete, but skinnier, though he had powerful chest and arm muscles. "I am Chris Marcos. Christos Marcos in full, but call me Chris, okay?" "Okay, Chris," Pete said. They took an immediate liking to this smiling, cheerful boy who had come to their rescue. "How'd you know where to look for us?" "Long story," Chris told them. "Climb in my boat and we'll sail to town. Movie people are very upset. We'll make them feel better to see you." "Aren't you part of the Chase Me Faster company?" Bob asked as they clambered into the tiny boat. "No, not me," Chris said, shoving the boat off and wading after it. He climbed in the rear and settled himself by the tiller. Soon the little sail had caught the breeze and the boat began to cut through the water. In the distance the boys could see the lights of the little town of Fishing Port. Once the boat was underway, Chris Marcos told them about himself. He had grown up in Greece, on the shores of the Mediterranean, where he had lived with his father, a sponge fisherman. His mother was dead. Greek sponge fishers went down great depths to gather sponges from the ocean bottom, using no diving apparatus except a heavy stone to take them down swiftly. Chris's father, one of the most daring divers, had one day been afflicted by an attack of the bends, the dread of every diver. As a result, he was partially disabled and had been unable to continue diving. But a cousin who was an oyster fisherman in Fishing Port had sent money to him and Chris to come to the United States. "For a few years fishing goes well," Chris said. "Then oysters get sick. Little red bug gets into them. Oyster fishing around here is all finished. My father's cousin, he has to sell his boat. He goes to New York to work in a restaurant. But my father is not well enough. He gets worse from worrying. Now he is in bed almost all the time. I try to take care of him, but I have trouble getting a job. I hear movie company is coming to town. Maybe they need a diver. I am good diver. When I was a little boy, I started practicing to be a sponge fisher like my father. But movie people, they say no. They do not like me. Everybody is suspicious because I am a foreigner. Oh well, maybe luck will turn soon." They were sailing along briskly now. The boys could hear the mutter of breaking waves and see splashes of whitecaps off to their left. "Where are we now?" Pete asked. "How can you find your way when you can't see what's ahead? You may crash on one of those rocks." "I tell by the ears," Chris said cheerfully. "I hear waves break, and no reefs are off there. They are what some people call the bones. Skeleton Island is off ahead, to the left." The boys all peered ahead, trying to see Skeleton Island. They knew its history by heart from studying the papers Alfred Hitchcock had given them. Skeleton Island had been discovered in 1565 by an English sea captain, Captain White. He'd explored the island briefly, discovering that it was used as a sacred burying ground by Indian tribes on the mainland. As the Indians did not bother about digging in very deep graves, many skeletons had been found. Because of this, and its skeleton-like shape, Captain White had named it Skeleton Island. At the same time, he had visited the hand, noticed the reefs which made it seem like a hand, and so given it its name. Then he had sailed away. In the years that followed, pirates had infested the whole southeastern sea coast. They had used the island for winter quarters and come to the mainland to spend their gold. Blackbeard himself had spent one winter there. But gradually the British authorities began to crack down on the pirates. By 1717, after Blackbeard was dead, the only buccaneer left in the region was the notorious Captain One-Ear. One night the British troops had made a surprise attack on his quarters on Skeleton Island. While his crew was being slaughtered, the captain himself had escaped with his treasure chests in a longboat. The British commander, as anxious to recover the gold as to exterminate the pirates, gave chase. Captain One-Ear, finding he could not escape, made a final stand on the hand. Here his remaining men were killed and he was captured, badly wounded. But the chests that the British had been so anxious to recover turned out to be empty. The treasure had disappeared. The hand was too rocky for him to have buried the gold there, and the British could find no other hiding place. To all questions, Captain One-Ear gave only one laughing answer. "Davy Jones has my gold doubloons in his grasp now, and he'll hold them tight until he decides to give them back. And that won't be until the crack of doom. Even when he was hanged, he would say no more. And the British commander was cheated of his spoils. It was obvious Captain Bunney had dumped the treasure overboard just to disappoint his pursuers. It was scattered over the sea bottom now, and no one could ever find it again. The boys peered through the darkness, hoping to see the outline of the fabled skeleton island. It was too dark, however, to see anything. "You must sail these waters a lot," Jupiter said to Chris, "if you can tell where you are by sound." "Sure thing," Chris agreed. "I sail all round here. Sometimes I dive too. I look for gold. You know gold scattered over the bottom of the bay?" "Yes, we know," Bob said. "Over the years, quite a few doubloons have been found that way, probably from the treasure Captain Bunney dumped overboard." "Have you found anything?" Pete asked. Chris hesitated. Then he said, "Yes, I find something. Not a big something, but something." "How did you find it, Chris?" asked Jupiter. "I found it last week," Chris said. "Only a little something, but who knows, maybe I will find more. Can't tell you where, though. Secret one person knows is a secret. Secret two persons know is no secret. Secret three persons know is knowledge shouted to the world. That is an old saying. Duck your heads, we come about on a new tack." They all ducked. The sail swung from one side to the other. The boat heeled the opposite way and started on its new tack, straight towards the lights of Fishing Port. "Skeleton Island is right behind us now," Chris said, "but we head for town." Again the boys peered through the darkness, trying to see the island. Then Bob gasped. "Look!" he yelled. "Lights!" Suddenly, in the darkness, lights had appeared. They made a circular pattern, like the lights on a merry-go-round. Music! Carousel music! Floated over the water. The lights started to revolve, slowly, then faster and faster. A moment later, a pale figure appeared, moving among the merry-go-round's painted horses. "The Phantom of the Merry-Go-Round!" Pete cried. "It has to be! It's a girl in a white dress!" "Chris, turn around," Jupiter begged. "We have to investigate this." "Not me," Chris exclaimed. "That is a ghost, all right. She's back to take a ride on the merry-go-round now the movie people have it fixed. We get away from here. Wish I had a motor so we go faster." He kept the boat headed straight for Fishing Port. Bob and Pete were rather glad, but Jupe was obviously disappointed. He itched to see a real phantom at close range. Behind them, the merry-go-round kept spinning, a blaze of lights in the darkness. Sally Farrington trying to finish her last ride 25 years after she had died. Bob shivered at the thought. Then, unexpectedly, the music stopped. The lights went out. The carousel and the white figure were gone. For some reason, poor Sally Farrington had been unable to finish her last ride. Jupiter sighed in disappointment. Half an hour later, they were safe at Mrs. Barton's boarding house in Fishing Port, and Mrs. Barton was spreading the news by telephone of their being found. She made Pete, Bob and Jupe take hot baths and get straight into bed. They were glad to do so. But just before he dozed off, Jupe murmured out loud, "I wish I could have got closer to the Phantom." "That remark," replied Pete sleepily, "does not reflect the sentiments of the rest of the three investigators.